And I will ask David Overholt to do our introduction for our next speakers, please.
Thank you, Melissa. And I'm sorry my camera's not working, so I'm just a blank up there. But anyways, yes, I have the pleasure to introduce to you our next two speakers, Grant Leslie and John McDowell. John and his partner live their summers on the Upper Rideau Lake, and Grant and his family maintain a permanent residence on the Big Rideau Lake. Both of these gentlemen are the presidents of the respective associations. John represents the Upper Rideau Lake Association, and Grant represents the Big Rideau Lake Association. Both of these associations are active and outspoken when it comes to the many issues that are facing the health of our lakes today. Today, we'll be hearing a presentation, which is the appropriately entitled Engendering Change at the Municipal Level, something that I'd very much like to hear about. So over to you, Grant and John.
Grant and John, if you could unmute yourselves and turn on your cameras if possible. There's Grant. And where's John? Second. He was here earlier. I saw him.
Way down the bottom, Melissa.
Okay. All right, I'll let you guys take it away and I'll get your slides started. Is John able to unmute himself? Sorry. There he is. Sorry, 1 second. Monica, are you able to unmute John?
Yeah, I sent him a notice that he could unmute himself, but he hasn't answered it yet.
There he goes.
Okay. And I need to just start my video.
Yes, just turn on your camera. It'll be in the left bottom of your screen, probably.
There we go. All right. Thank you. So there's two of us and I will be taking turns on the slides. So, you know, as we've heard this morning, the situation on the Upper and the Big Rideau Lakes is probably familiar to everyone on this call. We're really seeing, slide please, more intensive use, increasing number of year-round residents and enlargements of shoreline homes. There's definitely nutrient loading from stormwater runoff. There's some increasing boat traffic, and campground expansion is an increased density on campgrounds is a major issue on each of our lakes, particularly on the Big Rideau, but also here on the Upper Rideau, where there are two significant campgrounds, one with a doubling in size expansion and a dormant campground as well, which is certainly a development opportunity. So the overall context is that there's accelerating climate change, as we've heard from Dr. John Small at Queen's, and also here this morning from Professor Vermeer. So these pressures are not new. However, the longer, hotter summers, more people, more of the time, these are accelerating in dynamic pressures that are affecting our lake health. Slide, please.
The water quality in our lakes is rated fair to good, but in some cases we're seeing higher nutrient levels, particularly phosphates. In the Big Rideau, we do a Water Rangers program, so there are a lot of volunteers sampling water. The RVCA ratings are based on single deep water samples. They sample in the shallower areas, the shoreline areas, but they don't use those samples in the water quality index calculation. This is what they've indicated to us. We feel that the fair to good ratings may not reflect completely the water quality in our lakes. Some of the provincial reports show higher levels of phosphorus in near shore areas in the Big Rideau O'Meara Bay, which is a large bay, shallower water, and certainly in Westport in the Upper Rideau, you have quite a large population there, a lot of hard surface and runoff. Professor Small has noted, and Professor Vermeer, that climate change is accelerating. We're seeing hotter summers, less ice cover, and as Professor Vermeer outlined, significant changes in water chemistry that's resulting in increased algae blooms. We're seeing more toxic blue-green algae being identified and reported in the Upper Rideau. Certainly incidents that were reported and confirmed in one of the other lakes in Rideau Lakes Township, Bass Lake, the same. And we've seen anecdotal reports of blue-green algae in other parts of the Big Rideau, even though there was no official confirmation. Workers were ended up in hospital with significant rashes, and the diagnosis was blue-green algae. Next slide, please. Did we miss a slide?
Grant, you want to do this one?
I think we need to back up one. Yeah. In this region, the soil tends to be very granular and it sits on fractured bedrock. The problem is it has limited capacity to hold phosphorus in septic effluent. The phosphorus in septic effluent has to bind to the soils, and it tends not to because of the granular nature of the soils. And as a consequence, it basically migrates into the lakes. Nitrates are soluble, and so they don't bind, and they also migrate as a nutrient into the lakes. Our aquifers have generally been designated as highly vulnerable because of the soil and rock types. And we're seeing increased shoreline population densities, year-round use as more people escape cities and locate in cottage country. So you have year-round use of septic systems and more nutrient loading into the lakes. The increased density in campgrounds accentuates the flow of nutrients into lakes. And we know that stormwater runoff into lakes contains nutrients and contaminants, particularly agricultural runoff. Next slide.
Okay, I'd just like to stand back here a little bit and explain that the township of Rideau Lakes is the common township between the Upper and the Big Rideau Lakes. It's an important, very important township in this region. And it was also first on our lakes, first out of the gate in terms of its update to the official plan. So we spent a lot of time, not just ourselves, but other lake associations as well, working with the township at the political level and at the officials level. And the changes that we're outlining here with respect to inspection and land use policy, these are undertaken by the municipal government. So the municipal government is really the body, I think, that deserves the credit for having implemented these so far. And that's not to say that the Lake Association advocacy was not important, but just to distinguish between what it is that we believe are measures in the best interests of our respective lakes, recognizing that the actual policy and enforcement and bylaws occur at the municipal level. So with that said, in Rideau Lakes, there is mandatory septic, waterfront septic inspections, 300 a year. It sounds like a lot, but it's actually not, given the number of lakes in the township. The improved official plan policies that increase lake protection are registration of site plan conditions on title for waterfront lots. And at its most simplest, this is an important provision because the development that occurs on the lot is effectively permanent. And so it's important that mitigation measures to protect the lake should also be effectively permanent as well. And so putting them on title is transparent and it allows for follow-up. So there's a minimum water frontage of 60 meters on new waterfront lots and minimum waterfront lot area of 0.8 hectares instead of 0.4, including hydrogeological studies as necessary. Grant is going to speak to the sustainable pilot project on drainage in a subsequent slide. Slide, please. So mandatory septic inspections. This was an early measure that was adopted by Rideau Lakes about 4 years ago. And I think it's really emblematic of a possible change in political culture so that, you know, formerly lake health and the environment, even more generally, were sort of at the margins of other priorities for our township and our other municipalities. But now it's as if these marginal considerations have been consolidated into a more singular approach for lake health. It's as if lake health is becoming more of an issue unto itself, which is good news. So septic is a pretty basic consideration. Rideau Lakes commissioned this and publishes results annually. They do catch somewhere between 5 or 6, depending on the lake, close to 10% of systems which require major work. So this is a pretty important measure for lake health. And I should note that Westport, which is also a municipality on our lake, has a mandatory septic inspection program, and the results will be published later this year. I've already mentioned registration of site plan conditions on title. And I mentioned already the 8 hectare minimum lot size. I just flag on this one here, helps protect our highly vulnerable aquifers. This is increasingly a real issue in our area. It's absolutely an important issue, and we're going to see more of that in the future. Slide, please.
The minimum water frontage of 60 meters for new lots is essentially related to the issue of density. We, particularly on the Big Rideau and certainly on the Upper Rideau too, historically, you saw waterfront lots that were maybe 50 feet wide. And as a consequence, the lots, given the soil conditions, really weren't capable of managing the effluent from septic systems. And so density, particularly in that context, is a key issue. We know that, and we've been advocating against hugely increased density in campgrounds, which are really no longer campgrounds. Most of them involve the placement of what they call park model trailers, which are essentially a manufactured cottage. And so you see quite an intensive use of the land and significant density in these areas. The Sustainable Drainage Project started with a presentation to the Rideau Lakes Township Council. The idea was that we are probably seeing a flow of high levels of nutrient in villages like Portland and on the Big Rideau as a consequence of their stormwater drains and the runoff that they collect and agricultural runoff. The focus of the project was to identify how we could reduce or eliminate nutrients from stormwater runoff. And so far this year, the focus has been on stormwater drains in Portland. And it was identified that there are high levels of, and much higher levels of nutrients in the stormwater runoff than had been anticipated. And as we move forward with that project, we're looking at ways and means to filter out nutrients. And we're hoping to be able to demonstrate that some of these ways and means are effective in eliminating some of the nutrients flowing into the Big Rideau from stormwater drains in the village of Portland. Next slide, please.
Okay, so this slide is entitled "What It Takes to Move the Yardsticks." It's an interesting idea, and sometimes I wonder whether there's sort of a natural rate of change that can occur, difficult to accelerate beyond what the natural rate of change is, but certainly from the perspective of our lake association, what we want to make certain is that it's moving at that maximum rate, and we never want it to move back. So change is a challenge, requires a multitude of things. Earlier this morning, Fred McConnell flagged education, the primacy of education, and we certainly couldn't agree more. I think our board would say that education is arguably the most fundamental objective of the Upper Rideau Lake Association. So we do a lot with respect to education, but I just like to flag here the municipal dimension, and noting that there are municipal elections on Monday, so we may need to do some of these things again, and if so, that will be an opportunity for us. So one of the things that we have done is we've had boat tours of our lake. We reached out to the political level and senior officials on both the Township of Rideau Lakes and Westport to take them around. Took us, I guess, probably four trips around the lake last fall and then this summer for that, and they were very well received. We've done presentations on water quality at council, and we've been supported on that by the RVCA and others. We also try and share information and best practices across the lake associations. There are some very, very capable volunteers and expertise found within the lake associations. It's actually very humbling, but they're planners, lawyers, environmental experts. There's a lot of really capable people who are prepared to help. Of course, we draw on expertise within governments, conservation authorities, and elsewhere. And Grant has already talked about the proposals where there are pilot projects. There are others, but I think this is the most active and arguably the most strategic at this point. Slide, please.
As John has pointed out, we've been working with all the municipalities and other players at the provincial and local level, agencies like Parks Canada, and in the case of Big Rideau, we are dealing with 3 different townships. We're trying to engage on a more intensive level with all of the municipalities. The property owners on a given lake are represented by their association, and to its credit, and the mayor of Big Rideau, or of the Rideau Lakes Township, formed something called RLAC, and that's the Rideau Lakes Lake Association Committee. There are about 15 association reps that get together on a regular basis to exchange experiences and ideas and make recommendations to council. We've been able to form coalitions with other associations. John and I are presenting here today, but we've worked with Bass Lake and Otter Lake associations and other associations within that RLAC group. The RLAC group basically supported the initiation and creation of the Sustainable Drainage Project. And I think that had some influence on the township, which has put forward significant funding for that project. We have an association or a coalition with some associations that are focusing on some of the issues related to bass tournaments, which in some cases have become quite invasive of personal space and represent some high-speed traffic and noise. And there was a study done that showed that central weigh-ins and release of bass at a central point result in those bass taking 300 to 500 days to return to their breeding ground. So there appears, hasn't been proven yet, that these tournaments using centralized weigh-in locations are having an impact on bass population. Negotiation of compromises is in part related to the use of threats of appeal. Appealing is kind of a no-win proposition. If you appeal a decision by a township, the township is obliged to retain legal counsel. And in fact, that is paid for by the taxpayers. On top of that, the members of the association are required to expend some monies to pursue an appeal. And so really there is very often no winners. And but what it does and has done in the past is bring people to the table to negotiate compromises and solutions on some of the issues of concern. Political awareness is key. There's a reticence to engage in investigation of the impacts of agricultural runoff into our lakes because of a very strong lobby on the part of the agricultural organizations. And so what we've done is agreed that we'll try and meet with them and understand their point of view and hopefully work in conjunction with them to further investigate ways and means to eliminate some of the nutrients flowing into our lakes from agricultural runoff. Prior to our understanding of the political sensitivity around that issue, we naively thought that we would just move forward with a study of agricultural runoff, and without understanding the reticence on the part of some agencies not to get involved with us on that. Clearly, focus, patience, and persistence is key. John and I and other Lake Association presidents have spent over the last 4 or 5 years a great deal of time lobbying and advocating, lobbying to municipality and advocating on behalf of our of the members of our association. I think that we need to keep up that advocacy, and as John pointed out, education is not just of members of our association, but also members of council. Because what we have learned is that in many cases, councillors and new councillors aren't fully versed on some of the details of the issues that are impacting our lakes and potentially our aquifers. And they need to be brought up to speed through education as to all the complexities related to things like runoff or migration of nutrients from septic systems, so on and so forth. John, I think you're going to finish off with the last slide. Next slide, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Grant. Yes, I remain optimistic, and there are challenges ahead, so we're not, as an association, complacent. Grant has mentioned fishing tournaments and agricultural runoff, so I'm not going to spend any more time on those. I think that a major challenge for this next mandate of the Council of Rideau Lakes will really be enforcement. So they've generally got a strengthened policy framework in place, and now they have to enforce it. And that will require the, hopefully, the acquisition of additional resources necessary for enforcement. And also, you know, I hope that the township pays attention to symbols. And by symbols, what I mean are things like undocumented development. There's some of it on our lake. I think people generally know it occurs. And if it is allowed to continue, it sort of sends a signal to other people on the lake that the township is not serious about enforcing lot coverage ratio, building close to the water, et cetera. So I hope that there is rigorous enforcement in this mandate ahead. Campground expansions, that is absolutely a strategic issue for our lake. The major outstanding, I think, policy concern here is the issue of inspections and licensing. What approach will the township proceed with? And it is related to the enforcement point I made earlier. Increased sewage treatment capacity in the town of Westport, absolutely. That's a longer term issue, which has been flagged by the current council of Westport as a strategic requirement for our lake. There is some alteration, shoreline alteration that occurs in this township, and I think in this county prior to development. It's a bit of a loophole. People cut their trees down, then they do their site plan. This is something that we will hopefully pursue with council in this mandate. The last thing I'd flag is I think there's also work to be done within our own associations so that we continue to reach out to members to help them understand that having lawns right down to the water is not in the best interests of the lake, and that shoreline buffering is helpful and can work with some of the things that they wish on their side as well. So there are some lawns on our lake, more than I would wish, and I think our board would wish, and we need to continue to work with people on those issues as well. So thank you very much. And it's been a pleasure.
Indeed.
Thank you so much, Grant and John. It was great having you here. There are a couple questions for you guys in the chat. So if you wouldn't mind just looking through it quickly and answering those, that would be really helpful to us. But thanks again for being part of Lake Links.
Pleasure.
Thank you.